Hey, what's up, guys? It's Slick Mafia back again with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be reading and reacting to an article from ScreenRant. Now, everybody loves ScreenRant for their controversial hot takes, but they recently published an article. When did Batman stop being fun to become extremely dark? And then the subheader is, Batman is one of the darkest superheroes in comics. He used to be one of the silliest. When exactly did Bruce Wayne get so serious? I will answer this question very simply for ScreenRant because they seem not to understand that Batman was irrelevant when he was the way that they're describing or want him to be. So ScreenRant is saying like, oh, why isn't Batman just like fun and campy? And why isn't he like making jokes like Marvel heroes? And why is he doing this and that? And it's like, because when he was doing that, he was irrelevant and nobody liked him. So, like, do you want to go back to the 60s? Sure, people watched the Adam West TV show because it was one of 4 syndicated television shows in the entire freaking world. And there's nothing else to watch. But is it something that people choose to go back to today? The Adam West Batman, where he's making jokes and, you know, he's got the bat phone and the bat shark spray and all that bullshit, right? Like, people don't like that version of the character. That's why he wasn't popular. That's why nobody talks about comics from the 70s. But people do talk about Nightfall. They talk about The Killing Joke. They talk about The Dark Knight. They talk about all of these things. And sure, you know, BVS. And this is where people get confused, okay? I just want to explain this. Because people can have honest critiques of, you know, the DCEU and Batman v Superman and all that stuff. But what people do is they say like, well, you know, I didn't like how Batman was so dark in that movie and how he killed so much. And, you know, I just didn't like that. It was too gritty and too dark. So they go from that to concluding like, yeah, the DCU should be just like Marvel. Like, yeah, of course. Like we should just make Marvel movies with DC characters. And it's like those two things, the jump that you're making isn't logical because you're going from, okay, well, yeah, like it's a little dark and gritty with The Dark Knight Returns and which was the sample of Batman v Superman. Like, you can think that, and that's fine. But then to say the conclusion is, well, if Batman were just, you know, happy and lighthearted like Captain Marvel, then, you know, people would love him again. And first of all, I'm not convinced that his popularity is waning, and that's kind of the assumption of this article is like, well, Batman's not fun anymore. People don't like him anymore. You know, as I said, really, if you look at Batman's most popular story, the most successful story, it's The Killing Joke, which was released in 1989, I think. And that up to that point, that was the darkest Batman story. Because it was implied at the end of the book that Batman killed the Joker, even though he did not, but it was implied that he did. And not only that, Barbara Gordon is shot in the spine and permanently paralyzed in the book. So, I mean, typically in comic books in like the 70s, you didn't really see stuff like that. The Killing Joke was one of the first times that a character had a permanent disability because of the events of that book. And I think that, you know, normally with comic book characters in the 70s and the 60s, they would just die and then they would come back, you know, like Crisis on Infinite Earths and that type of thing, where these characters would die, but then they would somehow come back, or there'd be some backdoor explanation to get them back into the world. And I think that what was so interesting about The Killing Joke is that they did not do that. And it's like, yeah, Barbara Gordon, you know, she's paralyzed. It wasn't until 2011 with the New 52 that they actually undid that. But for 3 decades, Barbara Gordon was paralyzed because of what Alan Moore wrote in The Killing Joke. And interestingly, The Killing Joke was not supposed to be canon. It was added into the canon because it was so popular. And that's the thing, is that the canon for Batman, which is portrayed him as a darker character in the past couple decades, is because that's what people liked. The Killing Joke was supposed to be a one-off story. It was supposed to be an offshoot. But what happened was, it was so popular that they felt they had to add it to the canon, so they did, and now The Killing Joke is canon, even though it was supposed to be an offshoot, you know, non-canon story like we would see with Batman Noel or something like that. Okay, so let's read this. Batman has been fighting crime as Gotham's Dark Knight since 1939, spending his nights lurking through the shadows of his home city, serving as its guardian angel in a bat costume. While he's always been its vigilant protector, he hasn't always been a brutal and intimidating phantom striking fear into the hearts of criminals. Or has he? Batman has a long history filled with plenty of comedy and drama, horrifying gore, as well as rainbow bat suits and bat cycles. But when exactly did Batman stop being silly and get so serious? For those that love the sillier stories of Gotham City, there's always been a lighthearted version of the character to enjoy. From the animated Batman the Brave and the Bold to the classic Adam West-led Batman 66. Again, what are people going back to, dude? Like, who wrote this article? Daniel Millis. What are people going back to? Are they going back to Batman Brave and the Bold? A little bit. Are they going back to Adam West Batman? Almost not at all. But are they going back to Batman the Animated Series? Are they going back to The Dark Knight? Are they going back to, Batman Begins? All of these things, and we can just look at what are the highest selling Batman graphic novels and what are the unsuccessful Batman graphic novels. What are the most revered Batman films, and we can see a trend that people tend to like this iteration of the character. People don't like 1997 Batman and Robin iteration of the character. People do love the darker, grittier versions. And yes, I will concede that some people will say, yes, they went a little bit too far with the DCU. I would agree with that. I don't like when Batman calls in a strafe run on 12 different people and kills them instantly. That's not the Batman I know. But also, Adam West Batman is not the Batman I know. So the reality is that where he should be is somewhere in the middle. But what Daniel is saying here is almost that we want to go all the way back to the Adam West days, which is preposterous because the character wasn't popular then. Robin was created shortly after Batman himself in 1940. Just why was Gotham's dark vigilante suddenly joined by a young ward by the name of Dick Grayson? To sell more comics. Introducing a younger character was meant to attract a younger audience, and it did exactly that. The Batman series doubled in sales after Dick, the first of many versions of Robin, joined the Caped Crusader to form the dynamic duo. And by the way, they did the same thing with Batgirl. Batgirl was placed for a very intentional reason that K-Wing has discussed, and I will not announce publicly here, but she was added for a very intentional reason, a very political reason. We'll say that. And that's the reason she still exists today. It all goes back to that political reason that existed in the 1960s. I'll just say it. It's because they didn't want to make Batman and Robin seem like a gay duo. So they wanted to add a female to the mix to make them seem less gay, whatever that means. I don't know. Stories were instead filled with captivating colors and an equally colorful cavalcade, I've never seen that word, of villains. However, time would take its toll on the lighthearted side of Gotham. Fans started to clamor for dark and detective-filled stories once again. In the 1970s, the Batman series fell to the legendary team of writer Dennis O'Neil and artist Neil Adams. With the famous Batman TV series was successful enough, its campy tone left some fans wishing for a more serious take on their favorite detective comics, and boy did DC respond. So it's so fascinating because this article lays out the case that I'm making, and it essentially proves my point that in the 70s and the 60s, when he was more lighthearted, he wasn't as popular. And they're talking about, like Detective Comics, it wasn't selling. It left some fans wishing for a more serious take, and it wasn't selling well. So then they switched they switched direction, and then they went to The Killing Joke, and then they went into the 1989 Batman film, which was dark and all this, and it's like, it's because he wasn't selling before. It's because people didn't like him before, and now people like him when you go darker, and that's just what appeals to people about the character, and it just is what it is. I'm sorry. Whether he's saving the universe or just Gotham City, Batman's most likely going to stay the gloomy and brooding superhero he's been for the last few decades. There will always be some lighthearted stories to be found, but comic book fans can always take solace in the fact that as the world grows darker, Batman will always be darker. For the right reasons, we mean. So in the end, he tries to make it seem as though he's advocating for this the whole way along. But I mean, it's obvious in the way that he framed the article that he is not particularly on board with this, and with Batman being more brooding and more dark and that type of thing. And I just don't really understand how he's supposed to be this like really optimistic and positive character given his backstory and his life and that type of thing. And all the things he's seen and done. So, I mean, it's really quite sensible, and I'm not sure I followed the critique of this article. But with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you did, of course, give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comment section below. My name is Slick Moth. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.